President Trump today is expected to visit Minnesota, a state he only narrowly lost to Hillary Clinton in the 2016 presidential election. Joining us now is that state's senior senator and a contender for the Democratic Party's 2020 presidential nomination, Amy Klobuchar. She's also a member of the Judiciary Committee, so she's got a lot going on. Good morning. Good to have you.
Good morning, Mika.
So, Senator, it's sort of dangerous announcing a run for president in the Midwest this year. Yesterday, Pete Buttigieg had to go inside an old Studebaker factory and still got rained on. You, of course, provided us with the most iconic announcement thus far with all the snow there. But it is fascinating, though, that you know, it used to be Florida, Florida, Florida. That's what Tim Russert told us, and he was right back in 2000 and even 2004. But, man, that battleground for the middle of America really has shifted to the Midwest, hasn't it?
Well, Joe, first of all, Florida is still pretty important, as you know.
Yes,
I've already been down there, and I'm going again. But in the Midwest, it's exciting to have another candidate from the heartland. It was getting a little lonely, and I welcome Mayor Pete to the race. I thought his announcement was fantastic. But I think the point here is that you've got a whole area of the country that in 2016 really felt like their voices weren't being heard, and they came roaring back in 2018, elected Democratic governors like Laura Kelly in Kansas. We beat Scott Walker in Wisconsin. So it is still going to be a very critical part of the landscape in 2020, and that's why I've been going to all the Midwestern states, not just doing rallies and town halls, but also going and visiting people like Fran in Pacific Junction, Iowa, who sees her house submerged for weeks as she looks at it in binoculars and talks about how it stood there since the early 1900s with horsehair still in the plaster as the floodwater comes from a river that is 2.5 miles away. What's that about? Climate change, issues that this president is not dealing with. What's that about? Infrastructure, which is why I put together such a strong, bold infrastructure plan for this country. So when the president comes to Minnesota, I think he should be answering some questions as he celebrates the tax bill today on tax day. One, why he hasn't put his own taxes out, and two, how come he's adding $1 trillion to the debt and not putting anything into very important things for Minnesota and for our country and for Nebraska and Iowa and Indiana, like roads, bridges, rail, schools.
You know, Senator, one of the things that I loved about campaigning the most was when you knocked on doors, when you spoke with people, when you gave speeches, and a certain line that you were sure people would applaud at, they just sort of sat and stared at you. But then you'd say something else and everybody would erupt, and you would sometimes be surprised by what was on people's minds that the media wasn't picking up. So I'm wondering for you, what's that line in your campaign speech or when you're talking to people in their living rooms that sort of surprised you this campaign, that said, wait a second, I think the media is missing this. I'm hearing Americans talking about what? What issue is it for you?
Okay. What I've been most surprised at is how many people feel that they are being left behind, and the issue that they brought up that I think hasn't covered at all on TV are issues of drug addiction, mental health, and not having a safety net for them. And maybe they bring it up to me because of what happened in the Kavanaugh hearing when the nominee came back at me and asked me if I blacked out. That might be why. But I think it's because so many families are struggling with this. A lot of it has to do with health care, and they're afraid of getting kicked off for pre-existing condition, with this president threatens them with every day. But a lot of it has to do that no one has dealt with this, and they feel completely isolated. And so what I've said to them that have gotten applause and nods in a way that I didn't expect is I talk about my dad and how he had 3 DWIs, how he struggled with addiction, and how at some point when he was pushed into treatment, he was pursued by grace. And that because of his faith and our family's faith, because of the treatment that he was given, and that everyone in this country should have that same right to be pursued by grace.
Yeah, Amy, let's also talk about addiction. First of all, I'd love to hear your plan on what does the federal government need to do on the issue of addiction that it's not doing now, but also something that nobody spoke about 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or if they did, they sure didn't in the part of the country where I lived, in Middle America, and probably not where you lived. Mental health. So many people suffered in silence with mental health challenges that their families didn't want to talk about or their communities didn't want to talk about. But now it seems that Americans are not afraid to talk about mental health challenges. How does Washington lean forward and become more aggressive in helping the millions of people that face mental health challenges every day?
Well, a lot of this has to do with making sure that health insurance covers mental health just like physical health is covered. I led a bill on eating disorders, which is the #1 mental health disorder that leads to death in women, something that no one ever talks about. And we finally got some guarantee that their treatment would be available. And I think I've talked with Mika about this on the show before.
Yep.
Another example is just opioid treatment and addiction and what we're seeing across the country in dealing with it. I have been really surprised when I've been out there. And again, it may have been because of my own personal story and because of what we're seeing, what happened in that Kavanaugh hearing. But literally every living room I go to, every town hall I go to, someone asks a question about it. And I think part of this is because the president spends his entire day dividing people and not coming up with solutions. These people who are dealing with this feel more and more isolated and left out. And so one of my missions in this campaign, in addition to talking about those forward issues about workforce training and climate change and doing something about our debt and doing something to make sure that we're ready for the economy we're heading into, is to speak to the people that are dealing with these mental health and addiction issues and tell them that when I get in there, I'm going to do something about it and not just try to leave them behind.
And everybody is impacted. You mentioned eating disorders. Total coincidence, but I have a piece out on knowyourvalue.com this morning on a specific eating disorder that I suffer from and the mental health treatment that I am seeking and getting to deal with it. So that's up on the website this morning. Okay. I want to talk to you about fundraising. President Trump, his first quarter fundraising is quite something. A lot of money has been raised. Is there a concern, too many candidates, about fundraising? What are your fundraising numbers, and how much does a candidate need to raise in order to win the nomination?
You have to raise enough to win, and I feel good about that. In our case, we have $7 million in the bank, and actually I was 4th in the country of all the Democratic candidates for the number I raised each day since our announcement, which was less than 2 months ago. So we had money pouring in after that blizzard announcement, and we continue to do well across the country. And you want to have that base not only within your own group that you raised money from before, but you want to get in new contributions, which we have been doing. And so I think I don't have to tell you guys, there are a lot of candidates in this race, but you need enough to win. And then we have enough that we've hired really great people in Iowa. We've put together a great team that we've hired in New Hampshire, and you've got to do the grassroots politics, because I'm running this a different way. I don't come from money. I've got grit. I've got don't have a big political machine that I ran on before. I really ran on issues that matter to people, and I was able to win every county in the rural areas, that every congressional district that Donald Trump won. The congressional districts in Minnesota, I won every one, plus 40 of his counties. There's a reason he's coming to my state today, and that is that he has told me several times, if I would have come again, I would have won. Those were his words to me. And I'm someone that can win big in the Midwest, win my state, and I think he knows that, so I'm not surprised he's coming today.
So he's coming to Minnesota today, and obviously it was very close last time. And so the president's focus has been on the upper Midwest for quite some time. But this week, his focus obviously is going to be on the Mueller report. You obviously are on the Judiciary Committee, and we have been debating around the table over the past several weeks the words and the actions of the Attorney General. I'm wondering, do you believe Mr. Barr is an honest man? Do you believe that he is serving the public interest in his actions over the past several weeks, or do you believe he is only serving Donald Trump's interest?
It feels like to me that he's serving Donald Trump's interest. I questioned him about this at length in the Judiciary Committee hearing. I didn't support him because I feared this would happen. And that is that he gave us a roadmap. Right before he got nominated, he put together this lengthy memo that he sent to all the president's supporters, which basically outlined his view that the president should be able to do whatever he wants. It's an expansive view of executive power. And that is the view that he took to the Attorney General's office. I don't think it's a surprise that he did this 4-page summary to kind of set the tone before that report came out. There was no reason he had to do that. He could have just said, it's going to take us a few weeks to look through this. We want to make sure that there's nothing classified or things that could hurt ongoing investigations, and put that report, hopefully nearly all of the report, out there. Instead, he chose to basically try to manipulate public opinion, and I just think that was wrong.
Do you believe Bill Barr's an honest man?
I don't think the way he approached this is honest, because if you wanted to approach it honestly, you wouldn't have tried to summarize it without putting the actual report out first. I don't think that summary served any purpose but to help Donald Trump. He basically was laying the groundwork to say, hey, this doesn't look that bad. And now what we want to do is see the actual report, because I've got to try to pass my legislation that would require, if people want to get federal money for elections, it would require them to have backup paper ballots all across the country. It's a bipartisan bill. I want to make the case that Russia is not just didn't just do this once, they're going to do this again. This is a national security issue, Joe, and we need that report to make the case.
Senator, back to issues that you claim correctly go uncovered in large parts of the media, on cable and in newspapers. Last week, 3 veterans committed suicide on the grounds of various veterans facilities in this country. We have an average of 20 veterans who kill themselves, suicide victims, each week in this country, each day in this country, 20 a day. None of that appears on the front pages of our newspapers. None of that is a dedicated hour-long show on TV. You were talking about mental health issues. What can we do about this obscenity that goes uncovered? 20 years at war in this country, 20 suicides a day.
Yeah, this is one of the saddest things. You have people that signed up to serve our country. And when they come home, there was no waiting line when they signed up. And when they come home, there shouldn't be a waiting line for mental health care or any kind of health care in this country. The first thing is to recognize that some of these service members are in places like the Reserve and National Guard. They don't go home to bases. They go home to small towns throughout our country, because there's such a high rate of rural service members. And we need to make sure they get the health care that they need, and that we spot them. One of the things our state has done and pioneered is this Beyond the Yellow Ribbon program, and so that the management and those in charge at the Guard are touching base with those service members all the time. They're required to do that so they can check in with their families to see how they're doing. The second is to make sure that they have excellent mental health care, and that as a country we recognize that this is one of those wounds that maybe you can't see. It's not missing an arm, it's missing a leg, but it's something that got in your head when you come back, and so that we're constantly checking in. And then the third thing that we need to do is to make sure that we've got a safety net for these veterans, that we make sure there's not homeless veterans, that we make sure they get a job, that we connect the services to them, because our duty to help these members isn't just about the equipment they have when they serve. It's also about how we help them when they get home.
Senator, final question about somebody that's in your delegation, and that is, of course, Senator Omar, under attack by the President of the United States, who actually used that horrifying imagery from September 11th to launch a political attack against the Congresswoman. I'm just curious what your thoughts are. Should the president, should there be a formal statement condemning the president, the Senate, and the House? What are your thoughts?
You know, statements condemning, all of it really doesn't matter. But what matters is that we are not a country of hate. We are not a country of hate. And Representative Omar, you can disagree, certainly, with something she said in the past, but Representative Omar received a very serious death threat last week. A man was charged for making a very serious death threat against her. So what does the President of the United States do? He puts out a video. He sends out a video to the nation that is nothing but hate. It was sent out for the purpose of inciting hate. And if you don't see that connection between that kind of hate and violence, then no one is following what is motivating some of these mass murderers and some of these people who go out and shoot people across the country. When they see hate, whether it's put out by the president or put out by a right-wing extreme group, they get motivated. And so that's what bothers me so much about what he did here. People can disagree with something she said, but no one deserves to be put in the kind of risk that she's been put in because he put that out in such a big way. It's just wrong. Enough is enough.
Senator Amy Klobuchar, thank you so much,
Thanks so much
for being on the show. Please come
Good to
back.
be on. Thank you.
And the senator The senator touched on leadership, a topic we're exploring all week long on KnowYourValue.com. Specifically, what does leadership really look like, particularly for women at the top of their game? We delve into the challenges and stereotypes in conversations with Stacey Abrams, Claire McCaskill, and Carly Fiorina. Plus, a look at the crossover between diet and productivity. I'm giving up sugar, part of an effort to address an eating disorder. We want to hear from you on all of these things. Join the conversation at KnowYourValue.com and be sure to sign up for our newsletter by texting VALUE to 66866. And up next, ahead of the 2020 election, the DNC has launched a new effort to point out all of President Trump's broken promises. Democratic National Committee Chair Tom Perez joins the conversation next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.